address first before we start? Or?
No, just excited to be here. This is my first winter warm-up. I understand St. Louis city bylaws that it has to be below 20 degrees for this event, so I'm very glad we're in compliance.
Molly said that you looked out the window of his hotel this morning and he was shocked that fans were lined up out in the cold snow, but he said something about the excitement of how they're embracing this. What feedback have you got?
Yeah, I'll tell you, from what I've gotten to know of our fans the last couple of years, I don't take it for granted, but it also doesn't surprise me. You can tell, and as much as people understandably are not happy with where we are, the enthusiasm for this team has not waned at all from what I can see. People still care very, very much. They expect more from us, and we will deliver that. But it doesn't surprise me that people are enthusiastic about this. And, I have felt, and I kind of felt this leading up to the last few months, that as much as some of the things we're doing are things you do when you're not in a position that you want to be in, that I think our fan base appreciates the need for it and has gotten behind it. And I mostly, when it comes to that, I'm happy for our young players, because that has always been one of the appeals of playing in this market, is the fan base gets behind you here like really nowhere else, I would argue, when you look at the totality of it. And for our young players, whether they've been here, whether they've been in the organization, but this is their first time at this event, leading up to their first camp potentially, or whether they're new to the organization, just to get a taste of that and just to feel it, I think is really cool for them.
We have traditionally heard a whole bunch of ways to look at a season here at the Winter Warm-Up, from a bottom line notion of championship or bust, from division titles, to even on the ownership side what revenue needs to look at, like at the end of a successful season. For you, how do you look at success in 2026? How are you going to measure it if it's not by the standings, it's not by revenue? What are the ways you're going to look at that you moved forward in 26?
Yeah, look, there is on some level even understanding, and I've tried to be very clear about this, that we are not, prioritizing short-term success over what needs to happen in the long term. Even with that, I think, my mindset is such that you're never going to stop trying to win, and there is some way by which you will always assess where you are by the standings. So that's not going to change. It just also is the case that we can't let that distract us from where we need to go. And, with respect to that bigger goal, regardless of the standings, regardless of what the win total is, you want to see that core continue to take shape, continue to progress. I would like to be able to look up at the end of the 2026 season and feel like that picture of what that group looks like and what it will continue to look like, whether that's stuff that's happened here at the major league level, stuff that's happened throughout the system, and even stuff behind the curtain in the organization that's going to be necessary for us to succeed over time and make really good acquisitions and really smart baseball decisions over time, that is further ahead than where it was. That's a big part of how I'm going to assess that. There's a little bit of subjectivity to how you look at that, but I do think that is really important to feel like, I like to think that we have charted some kind of course from where we are to where we need to be, and to feel that we are moving down that path, that we've continued to move down that path. There's different ways to assess that, but that ultimately is something that I think we should look at.
When you thought about the shape of this offseason before it started, what you expected would happen, what you needed to get done, how closely has it kind of adhered to that? And then what do you still see as outstanding on that list of things for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's sometimes hard to predict both exactly what will happen and also like the order of operations. You control some of that, and there's other parts of that you don't control. This just came up. I was on KMOX across the street, and we were talking about, it feels like there's a lot more off season left. Yes and no. I mean, when you look at the calendar, it's pretty late, and some of that speaks to how the baseball offseason kind of has evolved in a way that I think for entertainment value is probably not anybody's first choice in terms of how stretched out it is. When you look at where we are on the calendar, we're past the halfway point of January. Spring training is really close. And at the same time, both for us and around the industry, it feels like there's a lot more that could happen. That's just, that's hard to predict. You can't always predict that. But I think by and large, what I was hopeful about at the beginning of the offseason was that, having said all the things we said at the outset, that there would be opportunities to do things along that path, and one after the other to find moves, trades, acquisitions, whatever it might be, that were in alignment with those goals that we set out. And I do feel like we've done a number of those. And hopefully, every time you line up on something, signing a trade, whatever it is, that hopefully you're doing it because you feel like it is in accordance with your plan. And so I'm hopeful that because of that we'll be able to find some more of those. But I wouldn't say that it's been so predictable that I would have any confidence that we could predict exactly what that will look like, over the next several weeks before we go to Jupiter.
Is the thought that when you go to Jupiter, your club is set? I mean, do you have any sort of deadline under which the uncertainty kind of ends? Because there are players who are wondering where they're going to be this year, right?
Yeah, you'd always prefer that in terms of kind of the headlines that could happen, that those are all resolved before spring training starts. That doesn't always happen. To me, it would always be your preference. But spring training is also a time where, really around the game, I don't think this is going to be unique to us, you're always on the lookout for additional talent. There's a lot of things that happen during spring training. Every camp has players who might be on the bubble, players who are out of options, Rule 5 picks, whatever it is, things that can move around. And sometimes you can do really good business during that time if you're prepared. And that's a team effort. That's not just about what happens in our camp, or not just about our coaching staff or our front office, but also gets into our scouts and the different things we do to look at other camps and try to keep our finger on the pulse of those things. And oftentimes in spring training, there's a lot of players who are still looking for where they're going to play in that year. And to the extent that that's the case and they're interesting to us, we're going to continue to keep an eye out. Hopefully those end up being things that, at least on expectation, or things that are more around the margins of the club. But, you look just last year, we signed Phil, was it March 10th, I think? And he ended up having a tremendous season for us, doing excellent work for 4 months, having a tremendous influence on the guys in there. And then we were able to move him at the deadline for a couple guys who we think have a chance to help us down the road. And that happened well into camp. So those are the types of things you want to be on the lookout for.
When you're moving some of these veteran players, the ones you've already moved, even potentially somebody like Donovan, what I guess, how do you weigh the consideration as far as the impact on the clubhouse and sort of that team dynamic? How does that factor into the decision-making process?
Yeah, it has to factor in. I don't think you can be blind to anything that could move the needle for your organization. Obviously when you have someone who's right in the middle of things, not just as a player, but also as a person, that adds some layers to those types of decisions. It's not everything, but you can't be blind to it.
With spring as close as it is now, do you feel like you have a pretty good handle on how much of the complex is going to be done and usable when you get there versus what you're going to have to work around at this point?
We have a decent idea of what to expect. We knew the whole time, obviously, we're operating on a tight timetable. I was asked about this. I think we talked about it at the winter meetings, and I probably misspoke a little bit in terms of it being done. We know there's still going to be work that was always planned to be ongoing throughout 2026, but the hope was that it would be spring training functional by that point in time, that there would still be things being worked on, whether some of the things that are fan-facing or even just some work that's going to be ongoing throughout the backfields, within the building as the year went on. We knew it was going to be a little bit of a photo finish, but still expecting that we will have access to everything that we need to run a camp. And, knowing that the first year in a new place or a renovated place, as the case may be, there's probably always going to be some adjustments you're going to have to make. And there might be, some cosmetic things that aren't in place. That you might find little details here or there that weren't buttoned up. That's just to be expected. That's part of the process. And I think everybody knows that, and we'll roll with those punches as they come.
With such a clear vision for the long term of the organization, what are the conversations like with the players on that side of it, rather than the front office side, where it's the folks that are maybe trying to make sure that they're part of that next foundation as you guys move forward?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting dynamic, not just now, but I think that will be, just as we go forward and spend more time together and go through the season. I'm really excited to be able to check in with some of our guys this weekend. And then obviously as we get into camp and you see people more every day, and it just gives you more space for some of those off-the-cuff conversations. I'm sure that's something that's, for different people, it's on everybody's mind in some way. I don't know that that's totally different from in any situation. I think most players, especially young players, come into this hoping to establish themselves and hoping to be part of something for a long time. In many ways, I think that's healthy. I think it's healthy when, especially in an organization like this, when people are really looking at, what is that standard that I'm expected to meet in order to be a part of this, and that they want to be a part of it, and hopefully be a part of setting that standard and raising the bar. That's something that this organization in particular has done very, very well, over the course of time. I think it's something we can and should lean into, and I think it's a healthy thing.
On your year into the new player development performance focus, how do you feel about what's been done? How do you measure progress made where you are now versus where you were 12 months ago?
Big picture, I'm really pleased. I'm very excited with how the first year went. The reality is, and I'm living this now too, in the larger scope of baseball ops, just in these first few months on this job, there are days you wake up and you say, man, we are trying to do a lot at once right now. And there are other days when you wake up, you're saying we're not moving nearly fast enough. And that's just the nature of this. It's very competitive. I think to the extent that there is a little bit of discomfort, a little bit of anxiety about, what we're doing, how fast this is going, people trying to adjust, people trying to figure out, how much to push, where you need to let up a little bit just to let people come with you, where you need to be definitive and declare like, hey, this is the way it's going to be, versus make sure you're open to that feedback. All those things are good. It should feel a little uncomfortable. I think we went through a lot of that this year in development. And I was really happy with both our new leadership and our returning staff for just staying engaged in that process. That was something, an ask I made of our entire player development staff in spring training was just to stay in it. That it's not always going to be perfect every day. It's not always going to feel comfortable every day. That's what change, that's what growth feels like. And as long as everybody stayed committed to it and committed to that continuous evolution, that continuous growth, that we were going to look up at the end of the year and feel like we really came really far, and that a lot of the things we were trying to do, that we were trying to implement, they start to become second nature, and they start to feel like, hey, we're helping our players, rather than, wow, there's a lot of steps to this or whatever. And my job, I think, was just to try to help people get there, try to obviously make clear what the bigger picture mission was, but also just support and nudge, as necessary. And I finished the year really happy with where we went. And I think it teed us up really well for kind of another wave of additions and some of the staff changes we made. But now you take a bunch of different people that have all been exposed to this in some different way, and we're going to put something together that hopefully is better than what any of them can say they had at their prior stop.
Does AI play into that at all?
It kind of has to over, in the long run. This is, I will admit, I think this is one of those technologies that, I think the reality is, I think I'm probably a little too old for this to ever be truly native to me, but I also think it is going to be really important. Obviously, that's a whole big conversation we could have about society and where this is going and all the different implications of it. And I think it's a really interesting topic, and, an exciting but also a scary topic. But it's going to be one of these things that if we're not leveraging it, we're going to look up in 5 years and we got beat to something. So we have to make sure how to do it the right way.
I'm shifting back to the team. You have 3 or 4 players on the roster who are in that year 3, year 4 area where they're either going to do this, or questions this or this. What have you learned about Jordan Walker and where he is right now after 3 years of kind of being all over the board?
Yeah, well, we're certainly going to find out more pretty soon. But I will say, from what we have been able to see and understand, even that he, for various reasons, including obviously where our complex is at right now, he hasn't been directly working with us, but we've been able to monitor this, and I think that's because he has had a better and more engaged and more communicative offseason than any that I think people around here can remember from him. I'm hearing a lot of positives on that front. Obviously, the proof will be in the pudding, but, encouraged by where his head is at in terms of, understanding what the adjustments need to be for him to have consistent success at this level. And, he's one guy where obviously we all sat here and last year and could talk about how pivotal a year 2025 was going to be for him. And it didn't go great. We all know that. Fortunately, especially at his age and with his physical talent, there's more sand in the hourglass. And so this year is going to be another pivotal year. But, you don't have to squint to see why the upside is worth staying with him. And, again, we've talked about this before in other contexts about the difference between patience and urgency. And there should be an urgency, but also an understanding that when you have this type of talent and that type of youth, that even if it's going well, you're going to be riding ups and downs, but you want to see the right work and you want to see the right engagement. And, I'm encouraged by how that's progressing.
Sticking on the player side with Von Herr, do you know, have a feel for where he's at physically in the throwing program?
Yeah, he's through kind of the rehab portion of it, and he's in the early stages of now this throwing program that we've designed for him. And there's been great work on the part of our staff, really collaborative effort between major and minor league staff and our medical and performance staff to try to leverage this not just for health, but also to get him into a place where he'll be better equipped just to throw guys out in the course of the game. So he's early in that process, but he's on track, and we're excited to see as this gets closer and closer to camp where he's at.
I'm Jordan. Is 2026 a 500 at bat type year? I know you talked about adding right-handed outfield help as part of what's still left. What do you see as far as what his landscape is for playing time?
Yeah, I hope so. I certainly hope that's the case because we're going to have the lane for that. But obviously, we don't want to hand anything to him or anybody. You want to have enough competition and a high enough standard that nothing is handed to anybody. But certainly, the lane will be there for him to do that.
You referenced, or you mentioned the player evaluation. For you, what's been sort of the goal or the guiding principle that's led to the changes that you made in that regard in terms of baseball operations and that player evaluation portion?
What do you mean when you say goal, guiding principle?
What is the vision for that sort of led the changes you've made? Or what's behind the changes you made? What was the impetus for it, and what do you hope that it leads to?
This was an area that just as I got to know the organization, the broader scope of the organization, particularly over the past year, I just saw some opportunity here to move forward. I do think, this is something that throughout the industry continues to be one of those big battles behind the scenes. I'm not going to tell you I have all the answers or that, I've seen the absolute best way to do this. I think, both with a lot of the work we did when I was with the Rays, and then we went through a similar process in Boston that I felt had gotten to a pretty good place later in my time there. I have some idea of how the industry is competing in this space, and other ideas, whether I've been able to implement or experience them or not, of what's possible here. And just like anything else, when you're trying to beat other teams in terms of identifying the right players, making the right decisions, that's been something that teams compete and fight over and throw resources at and put fresh eyes on, and just try to have a more robust and more detailed process and just trying to figure out everything you can know about a player, particularly a young player. But also applies to veterans as well, so that you can make the best decisions. There's always new information you can apply to that, new data, new ways of looking at it, and just having an incredibly robust, like A to Z process to make the best decisions possible. And that was something, honestly, I think like so many areas, you go back, 15, 20 years, and I think the Cardinals were out in front of using information there. Just that race keeps going. It keeps going, it keeps moving. And so we need to make sure we're continually in a position to try to win it and leveraging every possible resource to do that, and to make sure we're looking at players in the most effective ways for us to identify the best guys and go get them. So, that was something where I saw opportunity, and that was behind us, creating this pro acquisition director role under Flo that we did, and bringing in new staff to be able to enhance the work of our scouts, better focus the work of our pro staff, and then create a process in the office where we can continually improve and make better and better decisions. And this is going to continue to evolve over time. you can only do this one step at a time. But, there's so many ways that teams compete in this arena now that you can see the fruits of that in teams making better and better acquisitions. And I want to make sure we're equipped to go toe-to-toe with anybody in that.
We had Liam Doyle in here, and he was talking about how one of his role models is Max Scherzer, the St. Louis native. I'm not asking you to say if he could be Max Scherzer, that's a legend, but when you hear that comparison and him saying it, what comes to mind? What you can share about Liam Doyle?
Well, that'd be a pretty sweet outcome. I don't want to put any limits on him. I like that he thinks that way. I do, because, again, you talk about holding yourself to a high standard. He certainly has a physical ability to be anything in this game. And, you set a high bar, then, it's on us to help him put the structure to how he's going to get there. He certainly has tremendous ability. He's an outstanding competitor. So, the fact that that's his goal, I love that. I think that's great. And, you just hope that players, when they do pick those role models, that they've picked guys that are the ideal match for what their game can be. And certainly in terms of the intensity that they display on the field, I think that's a pretty good match.
Will he be in big league camp?
He will not. We may see, you might get a glimpse of him here or there, but we just want to focus on making sure the ramp up is where we need it to be, and again, not get distracted by some of the things. There's good things that can come from being in big league camp, but there's also sometimes some things that might be distractions from the right ramp up, and we want to make sure, however 2026 goes, we look back and say we did everything right to put him in position to succeed.
When Derek asked about the way that you're going to measure success this season, and you were talking about like the necessity of the competitive part of that, what kind of challenge is that for a manager, especially one on an expiring deal, to have to play up to that, but also need to be responsible for the stability of the growth that you all want, and how do you all handle that and mitigate it? Does it have to be an extension? What does that need to look like from your chair to his?
Yeah, it's always a challenge. I will say he's been amazing in terms of the conversations we've had. And this goes back to even before I was in this seat, just understanding over the course of the year the alignment in terms of, again, where we are, where we need to be, and broadly speaking, how we should get there. And he's continued to be great with that, throughout the season. Obviously, I've made no secret of it. Like I've enjoyed working with him and want to see that partnership continue to grow and hopefully flourish. And hopefully it's one that continues down the road. I think he does a tremendous job just keeping the main thing. I don't think it's ever for him going to be about length of contract or anything with respect to himself. It's pretty special that way. But I also think that even irrespective of that can get tough in that seat, because the nature of that, even when you're committed to something longer term, the nature of that job is your focus is just way more on today than someone who's in a seat like mine. And managing all the people that are in that clubhouse every day, again, knowing we still want everybody walking in that day holding a really high standard and doing everything they can to win and expecting to win. And I don't think you should wait till you feel like you have a team that's projected to win however many games to try to flip that switch to setting that standard. That is a tough balance sometimes. I just think what I've seen, I do think he's going to be able to navigate that very well.
With a young roster, there's opportunity kind of in many different positions. How are you going to balance getting people to AAA or getting people to the major league experience that they may need, or keeping them in AAA for additional seasoning?
Generally speaking, the yardstick I want to have is I would like, obviously sometimes events force your hand, but I would like for this to be a situation where if we are going to bring someone to the big leagues and really give them some rope to show what they can do, that we don't feel like we have skipped steps or taken any shortcuts in doing so. There is certainly a subjective element to that. And again, sometimes necessity may force you, whether it's for a short time or for a long time. There may be times when you can't do that. But I think generally speaking, that's the yardstick we want to hold, knowing that even if you do that, it's still going to be tough up here. And for young players, when you really look at it, even really good young players, failure at some point is probably likely. Most good young players do struggle at some point. And they, you hope, learn from that, and you have to be willing to ride it out with them to a certain degree. But that generally speaking, I would like to think that even when we know there will be bumps in the road, and even when we bring them here, knowing and being intent on continuing to develop them at the big league level, that we haven't skipped any steps in getting them here.
Ollie spoke earlier today about his enthusiasm about Mason Wynn and Victor Scott this season. What is it between conversations that you've had or what you've seen in video from them that inspires you about their performances in this upcoming year?
Yeah, particularly with respect to Vic, there were some conversations that started at the end of the season about where he was at offensively and specifically what he looked like when he was at his best and how to get there and stay there more consistently that were really encouraging. And he is someone, as you guys know, who's very, very thoughtful about his craft and who's going to take that feedback and process it and try to put it into play. And so there's a lot of optimism around his ability to do that. And when you combine that, he's a special athlete. So when you combine that with the athlete he is, that's really exciting. And then for Mason, we've seen it. You guys got to see him obviously a little bit at this level before I got here, but then I've been here just watching him over the course of these couple seasons have some of those growing pains and also have a ton of success out on the field and really come into his own. And he's one of those guys that I think as we do make this transition to a younger roster, it isn't just about performance on the field. It's about a chance to kind of establish himself in a different way and continue to grow in his career in that regard. And I think that's a really exciting opportunity to see what he does with that. We know this guy competes, and we know that he's an incredibly dynamic player, but now the environment's a little bit different, and so there's a chance for him to take steps forward in other ways that I'm really excited to see what he does with that.
With this being your second opportunity getting to lead baseball operations, what are some things you take from your experience in Boston that you want to learn from and apply in your experience in St. Louis? And to use a term from last year, do you feel like you're being given the proper runway to implement that strategy and have enough time to actually put this into motion?
Yeah, great question. Obviously something that I had a chance to reflect on, immediately after everything ended in Boston and have continued to, even through the past couple of years with this unique and cool opportunity to kind of be off to the side a little bit, albeit last year having direct responsibility for some areas of the organization, but still be able to be off to the side and reflect on some things and, watch someone who did an amazing job here for close to 2 decades in that role operate and learn from him as well. I think the biggest thing coming into this, there were a couple things. One of them is that, I do really value what this seat allows you to do in terms of bringing people together and getting the most out of everybody and creating the right collaborative environment to do some positive things. I also got to reflect on times when sometimes it is necessary, even amidst that, to be very specific and clear with people on what you expect and what you want. And when there are opportunities to do that, sometimes you need to do that. And, that's something I definitely reflected on coming out of Boston and hopefully we'll be able to do a little bit differently this time. And again, just being very both resolute in what the course needs to be and making sure that everybody is aligned around that and insisting on that alignment. And, then also, again, just being clear, again, whether it's internally or externally about where we need to go and why. Hopefully we've seen that expressed with a lot of clarity and honesty to you guys and to our fans. And I hope, that's something I'm sure I fall short of that mark sometimes, but something I try to hold myself accountable to. And I know you guys will hold me accountable to it. I think it's really important, especially in a town like this with our fans who are locked in and don't miss a thing. They know, they see this stuff, and so you better be open with them. And then also in the organization, because the more clarity you can give to the people around you, the better they're able to take the mission and run with it on their own. And you need your people to do that, because this is not something that I or any one person does alone. This is something we have to do as a staff, and you need to be able to give people the target and be very clear about the target and clear about how you expect people to do their jobs, but then let them do them in their own way and trust them to do them. And, that balance, I think, comes with leadership in any seat. And, it's something which, when you nail it, it can be really powerful up and down an organization.
Going back to Jeff's question about Ollie, we asked him about his contract status, and he basically said, ask you about the contract situation. Is there any urgency to get that done to avoid the questions? And if not, what do you need to see from Ollie this year in order for the organization to reward him with that extra term?
Yeah, there's only, I don't want to go too deep into it in this setting. But generally speaking, it is something I think, look, generally, there are positives to not having a manager in that situation, especially with the fact that we are long-term oriented right now. There certainly are. But I will say this, regardless, I would expect the same, frankly, from my bosses, and I hope everybody here will expect the same. What you want to see from someone, how you evaluate them, how you are clear with them on expectations and on areas where you think they're doing great and areas where they can do better. That's something, I view that as my responsibility to provide everybody that I'm responsible for, that I want that feedback myself. And to me, that should just be the standard here, irrespective of contract status. And again, you talk about something that can move us forward as an organization. Clarity in terms of feedback, in terms of expectations, and honesty in terms of how people can grow and get better. I want that to be a key part of our culture, because I just think just kind of, I think, simple, the faster all of us can get better, either individually or together, the better we're going to do. And in order to do that, we have to have the expectation of great candor, delivered with care, but candor and honesty about where we want everybody to be and when we're hitting that mark and then when we're falling short of it.
You mentioned Mason. For him and Lars, where are they in terms of just rehab from their off-season procedures and progress that they're at right now?
Yeah, Mason is really, at this point, he's not even in rehab mode. He's just preparing for the season at this point. Newt, obviously, that's a longer process, but he's doing well. Again, this isn't even to the point yet where I think we could put a timetable on it. I think if you were to ask him, I think his goal would be to tell you he's going to be ready to rock on March 26th. We're not yet prepared to put a timetable on it, other than to say that everything that we have heard and seen, all the feedback I'm getting, not just from Newt, but from our medical staff, is really positive, and he's doing really well and moving around well.
You got a lot of players who ended last year in AA, AAA, who are on that cusp. Does any of the uncertainty about the next offseason, as far as the labor agreement, play into how you look at who should get big league time this year?
It's a question I think on some level is in the back of people's minds at 30 close, but I also think if you try to overthink it, you're probably just going to end up doing something you regret. We don't know what's going to be the same, what's going to be different in the next CBA, and what the path is going to look like getting there. So I think if we get too cute in trying to sort of play to that, we're probably just going to miss something obvious, and we're probably going to do something that we shouldn't. So as much as, we might have thoughts, or you might be trying to read the tea leaves, I think that's probably likelier to be counterproductive than it is to be helpful.
There are only a few more shopping days left before spring training, essentially. Do you want to give Brendan some clarity as to where to pack for? Is there a time coming up here where that conversation needs to take place?
Yeah, I think ideally, he's been awesome. I try, obviously, if you know that you have a player whose name is going to be in the rumor mill, you try to offer them as much communication as they want. That's different for different guys, as you would expect with Brendan. He's been a total pro in this. It isn't even just about him, or even just in this situation. Ideally, that type of business, I can't remember who asked it at the outset. It might have been you. I don't remember, but somebody asked about this at the outset of this. Ideally, you don't want those things to be coming down to the wire, or happening just before camp or during camp. Obviously, we also have to do our jobs. We also have to keep our eyes and ears open. And I think if we were to say at some point, well, we're totally closed off to this, it's not going to happen, well, there's probably always something that could prove you wrong. And so you should never say something in an absolute unless you're prepared for it to be an absolute. But, this is a people business, and we're dealing with people, and I know how I would feel in those shoes. And certainly if you get to a point where you really understand the landscape and you think things are going one way or the other based on all of the input that you've gotten, all the calls that you've gotten, then, the sooner you can give somebody that clarity, the better.
Can you do that today?
I can't. Okay. No. My general thought absent something that I know is imminent, is that most of the time if a player is here, it's likelier that they're going to be here than not. I guess the one exception to that this offseason was Arenado, that we were in a bit of a different situation with. But I can't say it as an absolute. This is obviously, like we talked about, the offseason is sort of paced a bit differently these days. And, I don't know that anybody had on their bingo card that, like, this weekend you would see, some remarkable free agent contracts, if reports are true, happen and be agreed upon this weekend. Some of these things are hard to foresee.
Where's Hunter Dobbins on that rehab path?
He's doing well. He's now into the mound progression. Really, the last step of this that we're not going to see him do until we're really already into camp is everything that happens after he lets the baseball go. That's coming back from the ACL. That's really what stresses that rehab the most in terms of bouncing off the mound, fielding your position, all the things that come with that. What we're trying to do is, as much as we possibly can, to have his arm going to where we can layer that on and not have it hold up the process, but it is an important step of the process. Obviously, that's how you're likeliest to have that injury, and you don't want to risk re-injury by rushing that part of the process.
Would you expect him to pitch in spring games? Is that a fair barometer for that?
I don't have a specific timetable for him yet, so I don't want to set expectations one way or another. Certainly I think arm-wise, he's going to be in a position where he'll be able to do that or close, but we haven't laid out a timetable yet.
Let's take one last question. We got a couple players here ready to join us here momentarily. Thank you.
Chaim, how do you look at what the Dodgers did recently with Kyle Tucker and some other bigger contracts that have been out, and what that means for just baseball and the Cardinals maybe trying to compete with something like that as well?
Well, you could probably talk for hours on what it could mean for baseball. A lot of what it might mean or might not mean for baseball is going to happen well above my pay grade. And we can all have our opinions and our thoughts on that. I think as it relates to us, I think this is really important. Yes, the landscape is different team to team. That's a reality. We do have different parameters from what the Dodgers have. And therefore, if we want to win, we are going to have to go about it a little bit differently. But we also can never, ever allow that to be an excuse within our baseball operation. It can't be. I just don't think that's a winning mindset, and we're going to stamp out that mindset, even as we know it's a different landscape. We can't allow that to be an excuse. We cannot be more focused on the obstacle than the goal. And so does that mean we need to go about it a little differently, be a little bit more resourceful? Sure, but that's our challenge, and we're going to get after it, and I have every confidence that we're going to be able to do it.